everybody. Welcome to the next episode of the Female Film Critics panel. And we're really excited today. I have a great group of female film critics to talk about our experiences. And this is just such a fun series that I really love getting to do. And I'm film critic Rachel Wagner. And today I have with me Nicole Ackman is here.
Hi, everyone.
And Daisy Edwards is here.
Hello.
Yeah, from all the way across the pond. Thank you so much for coming.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so what we like to do is start out by just having our guests get a chance to introduce themselves and tell us a little bit about how you became a content creator or a critic. And so Nicole, why don't you start?
Yeah, so I'm Nicole. I'm from North Carolina. I have been, I was one of those kids who was sort of always writing and always watching movies and into theater. And I got into content creation sort of as a blogger whenever I was in college, and I started a blog for a school project and then kind of kept up with it, did the YouTube thing for a while back, whenever like there was that boom of YouTube, whenever I was in college in like the 2010, 2011, 2012. And then onwards from that, I started college in 2013, so it was sort of in its heyday, so where everyone wanted to be a YouTuber, I think, before people realized that that's like a skill that not everyone can do. But then from there, whenever I moved to London for grad school, I ended up becoming a writer for Broadway World UK, and I was doing a lot of theater reviews. And just before that, I had joined Next Best Picture as sort of one of the founders of Next Best Theater, which is our theater offshoot podcast. And so Matt Neglia kind of got wind of the fact that I was doing a lot of theater reviewing and was like, okay, like, would you like to, join the film team as well and sort of see if that transitions over? And so from there, I got started as a film reviewer, and now I write for a handful of outlets. I now write for Broadway World in Raleigh, which is really exciting that I've kind of gotten to stay with them. I wrote for them whenever I lived in New York doing like off Broadway stuff. And now I'm writing for them in Raleigh, which is really exciting. Obviously, like, I do a lot of stuff for Next Best Picture, as everyone will know if they've seen me on Twitter. I write for In Their Own League. I write for FF2 Media. And recently, not that long ago, I started writing for Culture S, which is pretty exciting to sort of get to talk about more just pop culture-y type stuff, TV, not just film, which is really exciting. But yeah, I sort of just got into it from a love of writing and a love of film and theater, and it sort of has snowballed over the years to a point where sometimes I'm like, oh right, like I am a writer now, like this is what I wanted as a kid, and now I can actually say it.
Yeah, I think that we're very similar in a lot of ways, because I also, my core is my writing, but then also podcasting has become a passion of mine, and we also both love theater so much. So So Daisy, what about you?
Yes, so I'm Daisy. I'm from London. My journey is a bit of a weird one. The same with Nicole. I was so big into sort of like all media, film, TV when I was specifically blossomed my interest as a teenager. Did media studies for A-level, which is sort of like age 17, 18. And I got into this program that was more specifically for younger kids, but they did have the opportunity for us older kids as well to do sort of premieres and press junkets, webcasts and things like that. It was a cool little initiative to get people into sort of film journalism. So I did a few cool things there, like the Amazing Spider-Man 2 junket. So I've met the likes of Emma Stone and Andrew Garfield. As you can imagine, as a teenager, that was very overwhelming, but it was a great experience. And from there, I actually ended up getting into film PR. And since I've expanded my career into more general consumer, but I'm really grateful that opportunity has actually led me into something that I've ended up as my career. I did start doing film production at uni, did that for a little while, and then that fell off, but it's all kind of come back together now where I'm starting to do film production again, but then also getting back into critiquing or reviewing in a way. I used to write for a little publication called Flavor Mag back at the beginning of my career when I was interning. So I was reviewing and going to press screenings and doing DVD reviews and features and things like that. But I'm sort of doing something a bit more off-piste now with the podcast that I do with my co-host Claire. where we watch the world's worst rated films. So it's a little bit different compared to, you know, seeing what's coming out and supporting new and emerging filmmakers. I'm sort of going into the depths of film hell and watching what a lot of people are deeming to be not worth our time. But it's such an interesting exercise in film critique, really. Looking at it from a little bit more of a theoretical kind of really in-depth point of view. So it's interesting how it's all come together in a very weird way, but I'm enjoying it so far. So
yeah, I have listened to your podcast, the W Rated, you call it, and
Thank
I
you.
was cracking up. I think you guys did a great job. And
Thanks.
I was gonna ask you how reviewing bad movies has changed your kind of view in a film.
Oh, it's kind of like just made me so much more open-minded. And I think I was open-minded anyway. I think you have to be to even consider doing something like this. But it's just allowed me to kind of really hone in on my perspective, which I've always had, but it's come more to the forefront now of, you know, even if you go into a film and you didn't like it, you've had the experience of it and you learn more about what you do and you don't like and maybe why you do and don't like it, whether there was an intention that maybe just didn't click with you, or whether it was the fact that you loved the concept but it didn't get executed in a way. And I think that's actually really important for me as like being a producer on my film projects as well. It's really it really benefits me in terms of what I appreciate. Yeah, it just gives me a greater appreciation, I think, because actually I'm finding some really hidden gems of films that, well, I don't know about gems, but I've certainly enjoyed them for different reasons than perhaps I enjoy the films that I love and put up on a pedestal and say are my absolute favorites. It's interesting how there's a different time and place for these kind of different experiences. And I think a lot of people know that through, like, you know, like the cinemas that put on like the cult classics and things like that, where people are like, well, I wouldn't necessarily say it's a great film, but I have an absolutely amazing time going to see it with my friends in a cinema experience. So it's more bringing more awareness to those kinds of films, I think.
Yeah, I want to have you two on Hallmarkies, the other podcast I do sometime, because I've definitely had that experience, because they're most of the films that we cover are not respected by most people, you know, that they won't even give them a shot. They won't even, and there are some legitimately terrible Hallmark movies. I'm not saying there's not, but there are some really fun ones too. And I think that definitely covering them on my podcast has definitely given me a new respect for the hustle that it takes to make these, you know, make these small films. And I you know, I really enjoy them. And I think that sometimes talking about even a bad film can give you a whole new respect. There's many times where I was like, what am I going to even say about this film? And then I talk about it with my friends and I'm like, oh, there's actually a lot to say.
There's a lot to unpack.
Yeah.
Yes. I have a period drama podcast with a friend of mine, and we sort of look at period dramas because both of us trained in university in history, but now are working in the film industry in some capacity. And she loves to like dig up these terrible period dramas to torture me with. But it cracks me up that our most popular episode to this day is still our episode on The Great Wall, which is a terrible movie with Matt Damon. And it's one of those movies that we were just like, I can't even find something good to say here. But sometimes like those are the more fun discussions where you're like, let's figure out like, where did this go wrong?
Yeah.
Like, where did this like
That's the
decent concept fall apart?
Mm-hmm.
And I think sometimes like that's what people like to hear. But it does, I will say, every time I watch like a truly bad movie, the next movie I watch, even if it's something I would otherwise have maybe considered like just okay, I'm like, wow, this is great. Like, this is fantastic.
Yeah, exactly.
Sometimes with Hallmarkies podcast, I worry that we have the whole monkey cage mentality where you're in the monkey cage and it smells terrible, but you've been in the monkey cage a long time, and so it's not smelling so terrible anymore. Worry about that a little bit.
I wonder if that happens when people are listening to our podcast, because I imagine a lot of people dip in and out. They probably won't watch them all. And I imagine if maybe you've taken a few weeks out and then come back, the slow descent into madness seems a lot quicker.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I was going to ask you, Nicole, about your podcast, because I also love period pieces. And so I guess there's another thing we have in common, but Petticoats and Poppies is the name, correct? And so how did that all get started?
So Maggie is a friend of mine that I've known since we were teenagers, and we've always had a lot of similar interests. We sort of first bonded over being into theater and period drama, and we both have a background in history, so we've bonded over that. But we've known each other like through high school and college, and now we're both working in the film industry. Me as a critic, and her as a background actor. She has done a lot of background work. She was in Wonder Woman 1984. And then now she's also working as an entertainment journalist. And it's very funny because we actually had the idea like last February that we were like, should we like start a podcast? She does a lot of podcasting about Star Wars stuff. And one of her podcast producers told her, like, if you would like to do another podcast, like we'd be happy to have it on our network. And so she immediately was like, okay, I have to talk to my friend Nicole. And we actually launched it in March of 2020, which is funny because it's basically like been our quarantine baby.
Right.
Gosh, it was the weirdest thing whenever we realized like, oh, we've been doing this for over a year, because like time doesn't feel real in quarantine. So, but yeah, it was the obvious thing to do, like for the two of us to have a podcast together, was to talk about period drama, because we're both those people who, you know, will watch a new movie and we'll be texting each other like, oh my God, can you believe that they did this wrong? Or like, can you believe that they said that this person did this? And so we wanted to sort of have a podcast to talk about period drama and give sort of more historical context to movies, because obviously like historical accuracy is not the only important thing in a film. I will say there's a line, I think, and Maggie and I are very much in agreement on it, which is helpful for the podcast in terms of like perfect historical accuracy is not necessary in a movie. But there is a line where like, okay, if you were going to change that much, why are you putting actual historical names on it? That's me referring directly to our Greatest Showman episode. But we like to, you know, kind of look at, if it's about a real person, let's actually delve into their life. If it's about a topic, let's actually explore that sort of in more depth. And it's been the greatest experience. Like, just to get to do a podcast with one of my best friends is really exciting. But also, like, we've dug up some weird movies that like neither of us had watched before. We've watched some of our favorite movies, and there've been ones that like was a favorite of hers that I'd never seen, or vice versa. And we're really excited. We've got some really cool stuff coming up. I will give a little preview that in July we're doing a special blockbuster month, which is going to be a little bit something different. We're going to look at Night at the Museum and National Treasure and talk about some of the history that is sort of seen in those movies, and like how viable National Treasure actually is as a film that, you know, tries to rewrite history. But it's really been the coolest experience. And it's also nice to sort of have, you know, a lot of the other podcasts I'm on are a bit more structured and stuff, to sort of have something that's a little bit more just like sitting down to chat with a friend about a movie.
Yeah, I love doing that too. And my friends and I, we started a little podcast in March as well, where we were covering The Nanny, and we're almost finished. We only have two episodes of our show. We have the finale and then 3 episodes of season 6 left, and then we'll be done, which I can't even believe it that we finished it. But we've had so much fun. It's just so great to collaborate with your friends on something like that and get to know them better and just have a fun time. And you hope that other people enjoy it, but I do it even if nobody listens.
Exactly. That's what we always say. We're always like, oh right, people listen to these. Like, we're kind of just having fun.
Yeah, well, I think you all should do Far From the Maddening Crowd on your...
I watched that for the first time.
It's so underrated, I think.
Oh my gosh, I don't know how I'd not seen it before. I think we may have actually put it on the list already, and I think we were saying that like maybe I should read the book, because we like if we're doing an episode on a film that's based on a book, for one of us to have some familiarity with it. But yeah, I had not seen that before this past year, and I don't know why I've taken on this project. This year I've decided I'm going to watch every Carey Mulligan film and rank her performances just as like
Nice.
a side project. But so I watched that one for the first time and I fell in love with it. I had rented it on Amazon and I was like, Mom, you have to watch it before the Amazon rental runs out.
It's so underrated. I think she's so great in it. I think they have
Yeah.
such incredible chemistry. It looks beautiful. This is a very rare circumstance. I prefer it over the book. I maybe it's part of these that I saw it first and then I read the book. But the book, I don't know. It wasn't as good. Like it wasn't as swoon worthy. I don't know. I was expecting it to be.
As someone who's a big reader, people always expect me to like always prefer the book. And I'm like, no, sometimes a movie does improve on something. Like,
yeah. So with W Rated, with Daisy, how do you pick which of the bad movies that you're going to talk about?
Well, so we have based our list on IMDb's bottom 100. And the way the podcast actually came about is because I wanted to watch those because, you know, you've got all of these best of lists, you've got the top 250 and it's all very official. And then they have the bottom 100 as an official list. You don't have to dig very far. And I'm like, that's taunting me. It's there for a reason. It's like a challenge. I want to do it. And the co-creator Claire said, please tell me that you're like recording your thoughts or something somewhere. And that's where the idea for the podcast came. So we're not working our way through from bottom to top because I think it would be quite difficult in terms of, as you can imagine, not all of them are available or they're very difficult to get hold of, but also, you know, we kind of want it to be a little bit easier on ourselves going in and kind of do some stuff that maybe we were a bit familiar with, and also like a big thing for us is that we want to get as many voices on the podcast as well, and really get to know our community better and just kind of give them a chance to defend or completely smack down any film that they want to. So we kind of based it around what people wanted to talk about as well. So there've been quite a few where there's one specific guest that's come on and spoken to us. But as you can imagine, there's some films on there like Batman and Robin and The Room, which has so many people excited to talk about. So we're going to have to think about how we're going to structure those ones because we want to make sure that everyone gets their say. But it's going to be a very different format to what we're used to.
Yeah, I'm sure those ones will be epic.
Yeah.
The one that I think would be interesting is Lucky Numbers. It's the Nora Ephron film, and it has an F cinema score, and like it's not great, but it's perfectly serviceable little rom-com. I don't know why it's so hated.
We had a chat about the cinema score thing on one of our episodes. We were talking about I Know Who Killed Me, the thriller starring Lindsay Lohan that she did in 2007, and I think that has an F. And we were talking about like the selection of films that have an F, and we were a bit like it's quite crazy to think about these specific why these specific ones. And our guest Andrew sort of explained that the people who give the scores are people who have gone and chosen to see that film. So actually, is there a perspective of disappointment that's really dragged that score down compared to people who perhaps have just gone and critique, like as a film critic, these are audiences that have wanted to see this film and then maybe it's not what they expected and then it's gone shooting all the way down, which is something we think probably happened to Mother, which is one that's got an F.
Right. Yeah. Well, very interesting. So one of the questions I always like to ask this panel is that do you think that a review is a review, it doesn't matter, or do you think that there is value in particularly having female film critics and female voices? What do you think, Nicole?
I am such a big proponent of this idea that we need diverse voices in film criticism. And I think that one of the ways that you can see that is some of these films that are perfectly fine films that have really negative ratings. And it's because the wrong people were reviewing them. You know, not all films are made, thank goodness, for a white male audience. But often that is, you know, still the majority of who film critics are. And I think it's a good thing that not all films are made for the same audience. You know, there are movies that I know are not made for someone with my taste, and that is totally fine, but I'm never going to appreciate them the same way that someone, you know, that does have the taste that they're made for will appreciate them. Like I'm never probably going to like an Adam Sandler movie, and that's fine.
Oh my
But I
gosh,
think it's
agree.
so, yeah. But I think it's so important to have women reviewing films, especially as we have more and more women making films, because I think that there are things that a male reviewer is often not going to notice in a movie. Like I think a lot about a movie like Birds of Prey, which, you know, whether you liked it or not, there are moments in that film that are things that I think are very hard for a man to grasp, like the moment, like the hair tie moment. You know, it's what everyone talks about, but it's such a real thing that I was like, this is a movie made by women. They get the female experience, and I think that it's important to have female reviewers who can recognize that, especially whenever you think about the fact that, you know, over half of the movie going audience is female. So obviously we need women reviewing and critiquing films as well, and I think that there's so much that women reviewers can bring to the table, and it's the same too for you know, reviewers who are people of color. I think it's important that we have diversity and sexuality and gender and race and disability and things like that, because there are things that people are going to notice that your average film critic might not, especially, you know, when it comes to talking about movies that are problematic or whatever. I think that there are things that people who are of the group being targeted are going to be a lot more likely to pick up on than someone who doesn't identify with that. Yeah. So I'm such a big proponent that like we need more women film reviewers, we need more people of color reviewing movies, you know, sort of more diversity across the board, because people of all sorts watch movies. So it shouldn't be just one type of person sort of passing judgment on them.
Yeah, I felt that way, particularly with Bridgerton.
Yes.
That I felt like I tweeted out that I felt like the idea of men reviewing this is just ridiculous. I'm like, of course they can. I'm not saying they can't, but it was so carefully made for women. It was so obvious to me that even the way that the camera was shot and the way that the sensuality was done was very, in a way that I think I've very rarely seen to satisfy women and for women. I mean, it was just so obvious to me. I, you know, a couple of people were kind of, how dare you say we can't? I said, you of course can. I'm just saying that this was made for women. Women should be reviewing it.
Yep. I remember I was like, I only want to read like other female critics' thoughts on this.
That's what I felt
I'm not really interested in what men have to say about it. Like, well, I take that back. I did read a couple of gay men's pieces on it, because I think that's with the fact that there is, you know, characters in it who are queer coded. I think that's an interesting perspective. But again, like I was like, I just don't care what a straight man thinks of Bridgerton. Like, it's not for you.
Right. Exactly. I agree. What do you think about that, Daisy?
I just, echoing both of your thoughts. It's so important because, as you say, you know, if you think about the majority of critics and what they look like, that's not the film going audience. It's not representative, which is one thing. And then, as you've already said, Nicole, as well, it's the fact that, you know, not everyone's going to have the same experience watching a film. And that's good, because we're all so different and we all bring our own stories as we're watching something that might reflect our own or be completely different from and provide another worldview. And that's important. So why isn't it just as important for people who want to read reviews about those films, for that also to be diverse? And I completely agree. It's so important to have diversity in front of the camera, behind the camera, and then when it's being watched. And, you know, those people are out there and they want to be doing it. It's the barrier of letting people into that world, which is still a massive issue, which is such a shame. But, you know, with the way that the internet works now, we're getting there. People are really like breaking through that wall, which I'm really pleased to see. But as you say, I am interested to see perspectives from, example, as you said, straight white men reviewing something that maybe isn't for them, but for that not to take away the space from someone who it is actually for. Because I'm just thinking in my head, you know, if you were thinking about buying a piece of clothing, a piece of, you know, gendered women's clothing, you wouldn't care what a man thinks about it. So it's like kind of the same thing, right? But yeah, I completely echo everything both of you said.
Yeah, I think that's a good comparison. I think it's true that even just beyond our obviously our gender and our other things, just our life experiences make our reviews different, and so that's valuable. Like I famously, I guess, really did not like Martin Scorsese's Silence, uh, and I think part of the reason is because I actually worked and served as a missionary for 2 years, and that experience made me look at the film differently than I think other people. And I just felt like, to me, it was so gratuitous in the way that it showed just torture after torture after torture. And as a missionary, like if you were watching that, like you would just be just completely devastated, and because you serve because you love the people. And I just never got any sense that he loved the people at all. And so I'm like, why am I watching all of this torture? What does it mean? It doesn't mean anything to the character. We hadn't gotten to know them at all. We hadn't gotten to know who they were. And so it was just, I just was so mad watching it. I'm just like, this is so horrible. Like the Adam Driver character, like I felt like he loved the people more, but we got to see so little of him. And I just hated the Andrew Garfield character so much. I thought he was so selfish and so awful. And I felt like we weren't supposed to hate him. I don't know. I just hated
That's so interesting though, because if you're coming from it from an outsider's perspective who doesn't know anything about that world, and you watch that film, then that's what your experience of that world is. But it's fiction.
Yeah.
It's so important to then get the perspectives of someone who can say, well, actually, here's my experience of it in the real, because that's how we learn about stuff. We do learn about stuff through fiction, but it's dangerous if the people behind the camera don't necessarily have that experience, and then we go, oh, that's what that is, without those people who have experienced it having those voices to review it. We will never know. We'll have a misguided view of things, I think.
Yeah, and I was expecting it to be like The Mission. I don't know if you've ever seen that movie, but I love that movie, and they have such an incredible love for the people with Jeremy Irons and Robert De Niro, and it's just so devastating everything that happens, but you feel it because you've gotten to know the people and you feel their who they are. There's humanity to it that I felt like Silence just left me so cold. But yeah, that was definitely an unpopular opinion that I had. I mean, amongst like cinephiles, I mean, I don't think that many people really cared about that movie. But another unpopular opinion that I had very early on, this when I first started blogging, was I was not a fan of The Fault in Our Stars, which was very popular. I felt like it was so manipulative that it made me mad. And especially the William Dafoe character, he was just so awful that I just felt like, who is this person? Like, are you kidding me? That you're gonna have basically like a Make-A-Wish person come and you're gonna tell them they should just die? Like what?
Yeah.
That doesn't like, nobody would do that. Your career would be over. And like, nobody's that mean. Come on. And then when they tried to redeem the character, I was just like, no, you can't.
Nope.
No, like you can't kill puppies. You can't yell at cancer teens. Like that just,
it's an unspoken rule.
Yeah, like come on, there's lines. Yep. And I just really didn't like it. And so that was definitely an unpopular opinion that I had there.
Yeah. Oh, that movie is, and I think what's interesting about that movie too is that book, I actually quite liked the book, The Fault in Our Stars. And I think that it captured something very interesting, and it just did not come across on screen. Which is one of those times too that like it is, I mean, I'm obviously every movie that I review that's based on a book, I haven't read the book, but I also think like even to the point of whenever someone has read the book that a film is based on, it makes their review more interesting, and that they can say like, oh, well, this is just how the story was written, or they can say like, no, this was a choice that the people making the movie made that made this not work.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think that does help. I try when possible, especially for the rom-coms. I try to, if there's a book associated, I especially try to read, because I think it does help you try to understand. I've also, for a while, I was reading the comic books when I would go, before I would go see a comic book movie, and that actually really helped a lot. I mean, it just made it like a richer, more interesting experience. I think that's why I like Doctor Strange more than most, because I had read a bunch of the comics before, and those are probably my favorite comics I've ever read. And they were really interesting. So I think that's true. Daisy, what about you? What's an unpopular opinion that you had on a film?
It's interesting, actually. It's probably one of the latest episodes that we've done on W Rated, but me and Claire were discussing it earlier, and we're not quite sure whether technically it's unpopular or not. Probably with critics, but not with audiences. It's the film out from last year, the dubbed the Polish 50 Shades of Grey, 365 Days. I don't know if you guys have seen it. It is definitely not a good film. But when we were recording the podcast, me and Claire openly admitted and was like, we had fun, guys. We had fun with it. We knew what it was trying to do. It looked like a beautiful perfume ad, music video. You know, we were able to appreciate the kind of like little things that were there and kind of just escape from it. Now it's got a 0% on Rotten Tomatoes, so it does seem like perhaps we are not in line with the critics. However, Claire made a good point when I was talking to her about it earlier, that, you know, it was number 1 on Netflix for a hell of a long time. So maybe my unpopular opinion isn't unpopular with the general moviegoer, because it got a lot of attention. Obviously, that's quite an interesting one in terms of film criticism, because as much as we said we had fun with it, there's a lot of problematic stuff that, you know, we discussed as well. So it was a very interesting one to dissect, because on one hand we were like, yeah, no, it is what it is, we had fun. And the other hand we were like, this is serious, like it shouldn't have been made. So
well, that's what makes Rotten Tomatoes difficult, is sometimes trying to figure out the fresh versus rotten, you know, something that you know is like not the best, but like you still had fun. And I don't know, like trying to decide kind of, or something that like, you know,
multifaceted, isn't it? It's not just, you don't just get one outcome of a film. Like,
yeah,
you can,
it's hard sometimes. Like, or they'll have movies where I'm just not that into the genre, you know, like, or I'm just not that, and so it's like, but I can't really fault the movie for that. But so how, like, trying to decide can be very difficult.
Yep. Every time I've given a movie like a 5 out of 10, and I go to log it on Rotten Tomatoes, and I'm like, do I think this is a rotten movie? Like, do I think it's, and sometimes, you know, it's like, I try to, like, otherwise I'm like, okay, if it's a 4 below, it's rotten. Like, let's just accept that. Too. But the 5s, I always just sit there in agony, like, like, I don't know. Like, clearly that's why I gave it a 5 out of 10.
Yeah.
But it's interesting, isn't it? Because it makes you then reevaluate your own scoring system because of what another site puts the value of what you're saying. So it kind of, it is very interesting. It goes through all of these filters before it gets to the general public, and like what you're saying with your 5 out of 10 is not necessarily what someone's reading on the site.
And I wish people could understand that there's not that much of a difference between my 4 out of 10s and my 6 out of 10s. It just like, is it lean positive or lean negative? Like, they're both flawed, but you know, you have to make the call, and that's hard. And I felt that, I think, most recently with Mortal Kombat, for me at least, that I felt like it had a lot of fun. Like, I enjoyed the action, but like the writing was so bad, and the characters were really annoying, and it's like, no, like, it's tough. I did go rotten on that one, but I didn't hate it. And so, you know, it's tough sometimes.
So why reviews are important, right? You can't, you know, if you just have a rating, there's no nuance in understanding exactly why, you know, I've tried to rate our films that we do on the episode before and gone, do you know what, I need to bump up or I need to move it down, because in comparison, you know, last week I gave that film 2.5, but this is definitely not a 2.5 out of 5 stars. Like, it's weird how you end up like maneuvering it, but hopefully because we've done reviewing the episode, you can tell why they might be the same rating without being the same feeling.
Yeah. Well, what about you, Nicole? What's an unpopular opinion that you've had?
Oh God, I feel like this is one that I still, in certain circles, like don't really talk about. But I hated The Favorite. I still hate The Favorite, which it's interesting because that obviously goes very against what other film critics feel about it. And yet whenever I talk to other women that I know who work in the history sector in some way, or the museum sector, they all agree with me exactly.
Right.
Which is an interesting like conundrum. It's like, okay, me as a film critic versus me as a historian. And in particular, I am a women's historian. So I think in some ways I was always destined to hate The Favorite, but it's funny because it came out the same year as Mary Queen of Scots, which is one of my favorite movies, and also a movie that takes like some considerable historic liberty, but does it never to the detriment of its female characters. Whereas I feel that as someone who knows quite a bit about Queen Anne, The Favorite really does not portray her in a favorable light, and really downplays some of her achievements and accomplishments, which I have very strong feelings about movies about little known historical topics or figures. If they sort of talk down to the people that they're about, I really hate them in general, particularly if that person is a woman or a person of color or a person of the LGBTQ community, because I just think that it's a shame, like you were talking about earlier, whenever a film is made on a subject, if it's something that not a lot of people know about, often people do take that as fact, and they take that, and that's the only thing that they're ever maybe going to know about that topic. You know, most people will probably never know anything more about Queen Anne than they saw in the movie The Favorite, which is a shame because she has a really fascinating story, and she was arguably one of England's like best monarchs. And so I have a lot of reasons that I don't like the way that they portrayed her. I don't like the way that they portrayed Sarah Churchill. And I think that the real story behind it is so much more interesting than what you see on screen. And I think that's just a real shame. And that is like, whenever I really hate a movie, it typically is because I feel that like some moral wrong has been done.
Well, and that's the thing, is that people don't realize that you can hate a well-made movie. Like, you can have them in your worst of list. Like, there's like, I really didn't like Tenet last year. I was not a fan of that movie, and I had it in my worst of list, and I don't apologize for that. I did not enjoy it at all. And I was curious though, do you in general not like Yorgos' movies, or?
You know, he's not like one of my favorite filmmakers by any means. Like, that style is not necessarily my thing. But, you know, I can appreciate that, like, stylistically, there's a lot to like in that movie. I think the performances are really good for the most part. I think it's very aesthetically interesting. I love the costume design in it and the production design. But it's mostly the script that I take issue with. But that for me is enough to
The thing about his movies is I feel like they would all be better as shorts. Like, they all overstay their welcome. With The Lobster, like, that would have been a really cool like Twilight Zone type episode of like a 30-minute kind of thing. But like, by the time it got to like the end of the sort of the second act, I was just so done with that movie. I was just like,
that's one of my other things about The Favorite too, is I saw it twice in theaters because I was trying to be like, okay, everyone else likes this. Like, maybe I was too harsh on it. And then I was like, oh no, I still feel the same way, but maybe worse. But it's also
I put myself through it again.
Right. Where I remember distinctly like checking my phone part of the way through and be like, we must be like almost to the end, right? And it was like, oh my God, we're only an hour into this. Like, please let it end. Like, that movie feels so much longer than its actual runtime.
Like me watching The Crimes of Grindelwald, I wanted to die. That movie was so terrible. One of the worst blockbusters I've ever seen in my life. It was so
a bit of a
bad,
mess, wasn't it?
Oh, I've still never sat through it.
I don't like
Don't worry, don't do it. Don't waste
it was so bad. Yeah. I know. And sometimes you do watch those movies and you just think, like, I didn't like Birdman. That was a famous, very well-praised movie that I did not like at all.
Same.
Yeah, I was a bit more indifferent to it. I just didn't
Yeah.
quite, it's not like I disliked it. I just didn't quite get what everyone else was seeing, I guess.
Mm.
And I think that's one of those things too, where like as a theater reviewer, and as someone who like had been a theater reviewer in New York City, I was like, this just isn't, it's not realistic, guys. Like,
Well, the Critic is just the most cringe-worthy
oh,
character and all of the female characters in Birdman are all shrill, terrible, horrible. And I get it's from his perspective, so maybe that's why, but like it just I just did not care for it.
movie.
I felt like it was way style over substance.
Mm-hmm.
In my opinion. Like, yeah, it looked cool, but I mean, give them the cinematography award. That's fine.
Yeah.
But the fact that it beat Boyhood made me really like really, it would have been, that year was such a strong year at the Oscars. Like it would have been I almost every single of the other nominees I would have preferred over Birdman. I liked I mean Whiplash, that certainly was more deserving.
Yeah.
I don't know, there was Grand Budapest Hotel. There were so many good ones that year, and I'm just like, what's wrong?
Always happens with the Oscars, though, doesn't it?
I know.
It's always like all the nominees, and you're like, one of these things is not like the others, and therefore that's the one that's going to win.
That's right.
No,
I think that's literally true. That especially with the tiers system that they have now, that the one that's the most vanilla is going to probably win. That's why it was so amazing when Parasite won. We were just like,
what a moment.
The best movie actually won? What?
It was wild.
Yeah.
That never happened. It was like the one good thing of 2020.
Yeah, literally.
So what we also like to do is talk about a review that we're proud of, or an episode of podcast, or just something like that, something you made that you think was really well done. And what about you, Nicole? What do you think about it?
Yeah, so I spent some time trying to like think about what this would be for me, because obviously I've done a handful of pieces that I was proud of. My most recent thing that I was proud of is just my Promising Young Woman review, partially because I was so stressed over writing it, because my editor, Matt Neglia, had seen it at Sundance and had been hyping this movie up for like a full year by the time I saw it almost. And then he was like, okay, actually, I want you to write the review. And I was like, Matt, this is a lot of pressure to put on me. But I was actually really happy with how it turned out. But as far as like the thing that I'm happiest with that I've written, I reviewed Little Women for In Their Own League, and I also wrote a post about it for my own blog, which I wrote immediately whenever I got home from my screening of it. And I kind of just like threw out like 1,000 words onto my computer and was like, all right, well, here, have that world. And then I actually read it back the other day and I was like, oh, this is actually quite good. Like, it's the most open and raw and honest thing I've ever written. And it also like has such a special place in my heart now too, because my sister's 8 years younger than I am, and she is in every way like the Amy to my Joe. And she actually asked me if she could write a piece for my blog about the movie and about being someone who has loved Amy March since they were a child, and other people finally realizing that Amy March is a cool character. So we have these like cute companion pieces now.
That's great.
But it was a really fun experience trying to sort of take this piece that I'd written that was all about like my emotional attachment to Little Women, because it's been my favorite book since I was like 7 years old, and trying to formulate it into a review that sort of encapsulated. And it's like one of my longest reviews I've ever written, because I was like, no, I need to talk about every cast member. I need to talk about like every design choice and everything. But I was really happy with the way that it turned out. And it's also just really nice now to be able to look that I have this very personal piece written about it, and then more of like a proper film review that I can look at. So it's also one of those things that I was not sure I was going to be able to articulate in any way my feelings on a movie that feels so incredibly personal to me. So I was just like, it always makes me feel better to read it back and be like, oh, right, I did actually make real words about this.
Yeah, those are always the most special reviews, the when you can when it's something that you really feel passionate about, and also when you get to introduce people to something that they might otherwise have missed. Like I definitely
Yeah.
felt that way in 2018 with Wild Rose. That was a movie I just loved, and it really spoke to me and her experience. And I think it's one that could be easily missed. I would have missed it if I hadn't. Back in the good old days when I would go to the Indie Art House Theater in Salt Lake, and I would watch just movies the whole day, the whole day.
Yeah.
And I that day I just had a gap of time, and I was like, okay, well, I'll see Wild Rose. I knew nothing about it, which is the best experience. And I just, it blew me away, and I just loved it. It was so good. And when you can express that, that's just the best.
Definitely.
It's the highlight of the job. But Daisy, what about you? What's something that you have created that you're really proud of?
So this is sort of taking me back to when I did written reviews. There's two I wanted to briefly bring up. One of them was my review for John Wick 2, which was one of my, just, I don't know, you just have those random experiences in the cinema where you just completely lose yourself in a film. It doesn't matter what it is. You just remember just being so enveloped in it. And I wrote the review on the way home. I tend to like get my notes down. I don't like writing notes when I'm in the cinema because it ends up just being like diagonal across the page because I can't do the whole writing in the dark thing. Yeah. So I used to tend to just write my notes on the way home and then sort of get working the next day. But I was just so like enthused and like just full of energy afterwards that I basically just wrote it. And of course I went through a few amendments and a few drafts, but ultimately the passion that I got straight away from that was what stayed in that review. And I was really happy with how tight I managed to keep it whilst getting all of my opinions across. And that just really, every time I read it now, it just really encapsulates like how I felt in the cinema, it's just a lovely thing to be able to do when, you get further and further away from that experience as a memory. But I also wanted to bring up that I did a bit of a longer review. I specifically requested that it be longer for Marvel's Iron Fist, one of their Netflix shows for season 1. And it was an interesting one because I was really excited for it because I am one of these people that loves everything. I'm like, give me all the Marvel stuff. I will eat it up. But I really hated it. And it was one of those things where it was like a really tough, not decision, it was a tough thing to admit that I'm a big fan of everything they've done so far. And now I've kind of got to drag them through the mud a little bit. So I wanted to bring that one up as well, because I'm actually just proud of how, I kept my hat on. I didn't, I didn't sort of waver, and I was like, no, I'm going to be completely honest here because, this is what it's about. The MCU is such a big thing that lots of people love, but they do make missteps, it's not perfect. And, the more that they churn stuff out, the more I'm a bit like, yeah, maybe I'm over it now. But at the time it was in the peak of, them bringing all this stuff out. So I'm also very proud of doing a review of something that perhaps I could have just kind of maybe not gone in as hard on, but actually I was like, no, I'm gonna keep my integrity and be honest about it. So I was pleased that I did that.
Yeah, whenever you have a criticism of any of the superhero movies, it's always rough. That's
the scary clicking send.
I feel like, why do we even review them at a certain point? Because it's just so stressful. Because I famously didn't like Shazam when everybody else loved it. I also didn't like Spider-Man Far From Home. I thought that was terrible. And it's tough. You get so much hate if you, I don't know, and it's like I just like ducking cover, and I'm like, please.
Yeah. Just send and run away, publish and just like hide under the bed.
I was worried about reviewing Wonder Woman 1984 because I was like,
Right.
oh God, am I gonna get like, what is the
Yeah.
response to this gonna be? And
It
then
was
I ended up liking
disappointing.
it a little bit more than other people. Like I didn't, I think
Yeah.
I gave it like a 5 out of 10, but it ended up being better than most people. So I think I like escaped all of it because people were like, well, she hates it less than everyone else.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That was, I give it a 5.5 out of 10, like barely fresh, just barely.
Yep.
On the 10.
But yeah, it was definitely disappointing. It was not as good as I hoped it would
I
be.
was like, see this film without Pedro Pascal, I give it a this, but like I'm gonna give it this for him,
Like it was definitely made, I felt the heart of it. I felt like they were,
Mhm.
I could see what they were trying to do, but
Yep.
it didn't really work. But
Yep.
yeah, and one that it's funny because when you put out these reviews, most of the time you put them out before the public has seen
Yeah.
the films, and every once in a while there'll be something that I respond to so much differently, it seems like, than everybody else, and I'm just like, oh, okay, and it does make you sort of second guess yourself. Did I really like it that much, or did I do not
Right?
like it that much?
Yep.
Everybody else loves it. For me, one example was Mary Poppins Returns. So I went and saw that, and I just thought it was beautiful. And I am not a fan of, in general, these Disney live action remakes slash sequels slash whatever. I just tend to not enjoy those films. But this, for me, it just captured the heart of the nostalgia of Disney, and I felt like I was sitting in Main Street Disneyland. Like it had that
Yep.
feel for me, and I really loved my review of that film. I thought that it was really well written, and I just talked about how I was swept away in an experience of pure joy, and I love Little Light Fantastic, and just the songs and the style of it, and I thought Emily Blunt was perfectly cast, and so it was something that really worked for me. And then I just felt like everybody else was so meh on it. I was like, oh.
I love that movie, and it's one of those that I kind of do wonder. A lot of the critics I felt like were older white men, and again, it was one of those things where I'm like, do I care what you think? And that like sounds mean, but I'm like, what these critics think about this and what I'm gonna think about this movie have very little in common.
It does seem like my Broadway friends, super into show tunes, enjoyed the movie more than most people. So maybe that's part of it. But
Yep.
it made me sad because I just feel like if it had been the one to have huge results, like we would get so much more interesting pieces from Disney than
Yep.
than we've been getting, because they really tried hard they wrote all new music. They had, and so, it's just like, oh, like
Yeah.
I would love to get more like that and less like Lion King, where it was just, to me, it was just so bland.
I could talk for days about, more Cinderella, The Jungle Book,
Yes.
Mary Poppins Returns, less Lion King, that sort of, if we have that movie, I don't need to see it in like weird CGI.
Yeah.
Literally.
I said in my review, I said, it truly does optimize the mundane by taking the trials and pressures of life and reminding the audience to trip a little light fantastic and smile a little more through your struggles. It's one of the most joyful and effervescent experiences I've had at the cinemas in a long time.
I'm getting emotional just thinking about it. I love that.
Yeah.
That's the highlight of the job, is when you feel like you have, captured something special. And I think that it's hard to write about the films that I feel sort of lukewarm for. I'm like, I don't know what to say about this. But then it's also sometimes challenging to write about the things that you feel really passionate about.
Yeah. I feel like the only easy reviews to write are when I'm in like the 7-8 area. Because I also I hate writing the super bad reviews. Like
I know.
I wrote a review earlier this year for the movie Cherry,
Oh.
which I thought was just horrendous, and I like blasted it. But I felt so bad writing. I literally cried while writing it because I was like, so obviously it's that thing of that like so many people worked hard on this movie and it turned out so terribly that you like feel bad for them, but you can't like not tell the truth. Like,
no, exactly.
yeah.
But I think that actually gives a humanity to the bad reviews that's important, that you recognize that there are, people that have put their heart and soul into it. And I definitely feel that way after I've done so many interviews, particularly for Homeworks podcast, that, these movies that most people wouldn't care about or like, and that you get to see behind the scenes and how much work goes into what you think is just like a fluffy Hallmark movie. And it definitely makes you, like, you still have to be honest, like you're saying, but there can be humanity to a bad review.
Yeah,
that's definitely something that we've always said about our podcast, is that we're really careful not to basically kick a dog when it's down. Like, these are notoriously like well hated or just completely ripped to shreds films. We're not here to just like double down on that. We actually want to experience them for ourselves and genuinely critique them based on what we think. But as you say, it's always so important to remember that, people are involved from the bottom to the top. And I think if you have that lens when you're doing it, then you know that you're doing it with that sort of empathy and integrity. But when we were talking about that, it suddenly made me think of The Room, which is notoriously a terrible film that everybody loves, but I think everybody loves it more because of the guys behind it and the fact that they've become, people know who they are as people and celebrities, and like, he wanted to make a good film. And I think people really respect that, and because of that they love it wholeheartedly, like completely unironically, because they know that he had a passion behind it. And then look, you've got like a whole film based on the making of it now. Like, it's just crazy when you think about it, really. Like,
I think that makes the difference between something like The Room versus something like, say, Sharknado, because because Sharknado is so calculated to be a bad movie. It's not the same experience as somebody who really tried to make something good.
And it makes it easier to critique badly when it's that. If it's a big studio film where you know that they've, like when we covered Date Movie and Vampires Suck, the Friedberg and Seltzer films, it was so much easier to slag those off because you know that they were just cash grabs. There's no heart or soul in them at all, and they go out of their way to offend people. So I really didn't mind ripping into those as much.
Yeah. One great made with heart but spectacularly misguided movie that you ought to do on your show from holidays is Pottersville. I don't know if you've ever heard of it. Have you seen it, Nicole?
I've heard of it. I haven't seen it.
I feel like I've heard of it, but I haven't seen it.
Oh my gosh, it's epic. It's on Netflix. But it has this great cast with Michael Shannon, Judy Greer, and it's about this man who finds out that his wife is a furry, like that sounds like a furry, and is and they're trying to find Bigfoot in.
Oh my god!
And there's all these It's a Wonderful Life reference. It is madness.
That's not what I expected it to be about at all. No.
Wow.
That was a really fun review to write.
Sign me up. I've gotta watch this.
It's Christina Hendricks is in it from Mad Men. Ron Perlman. It's nuts.
Okay.
Yeah,
that was a really fun one. And there's this whole subplot of this reality TV show that's comes to film about the Bigfoot sighting, and you gotta see it.
Oh my god!
As somebody who covers all of the Christmas movies, this was really fun. Yeah, last year I watched 115 Christmas movies. New.
Oh my
god!
Yeah,
that's wild.
That's
intense. But super fun, and I guess it's was meant to be that I cover Christmas movies my specialties: Christmas movies, animation, and rom-coms are kind of my jam.
There's a nice overlap there. That probably helps.
Yeah, I think that it's good as a critic to remind yourself that it is a privilege to get to do what we get to do. And we're very, very, very fortunate. And so I think it has its struggles sometimes. It can be challenging, and I think it's harder than people probably realize. People think it's like this lush gig, but but it is a privilege. So. Well, this was so fun to get to talk with both of you. I really enjoyed it, and I'm grateful for you coming on. And hopefully, we can collaborate in the future because I really enjoyed this conversation. And Nicole, where can people find you and your content?
Yeah, you can find me. The easiest place is probably to go to my Twitter, which is at Nicole Ackman 16. I'm also on Letterboxd, Instagram, all the places under that username. But I have a link tree in my Twitter bio, which has links to all the different places that I write for, and my period drama podcast as well.
And what about you, Daisy?
So you can find me on Twitter at Daisy Vic Edwards, and then the podcast is at W Rated Pod on Twitter as well. And we've got a link tree, so whatever platform you use to listen to the podcast, you should be able to find it on there.
Great. And you can find me at Rachel's Reviews all over social media, iTunes, YouTube, and on Rotten Tomatoes. So check that out. And also make sure you're following the Hallmarkies podcast. Lots of fun stuff going on over there. So please take a look at that. And we also have our Patron group, which is really fun. And you get a chance to participate in watch-alongs with stars like Paul Campbell and Mary Lou Henner. So really fun. Check that out. And also have the merch store, which has tons of fun designs. So check that out. And thanks so much, ladies. This was great. And we will definitely have to get together again soon.
Yes, thank you so much.
Yeah,
bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.